Hi, I'm David with Portrait Displays, and in this video, we're going to walk through calibrating the ASUS PA32UCDM QD-OLED using Calman Studio, the C6 HDR5000 colorimeter, and the G1 pattern source. Let's get started. I'm going to come down to my computer and double-click on Calman for Business to launch it. Now, it's important to note that the ASUS PA32UCDM is included in both Calman Studio and Calman Ultimate. Today, we're running Calman Studio. With Calman launched, we're going to come up to the top left, click on Calman, come down to Open Workflow Template, hover over to Display Specific, and load the ASUS Monitor Calibration Workflow. Now in a future build of Calman, we're going to be changing this name to AutoCal ASUS. So if you happen to see that and you're running a future build of Calman, it's the same thing, select that, and you're ready to go. With the ASUS Monitor workflow loaded, you'll notice that there's an administrator mode required prompt. That's only applicable on older ASUS monitors. The newer PA32UCDM does not require the administrator mode, so I'm going to press OK and continue with my calibration process. On the bottom, you'll notice that there are options to choose your signal range, such as SDR or HDR, as well as your technology. To start this, let's select SDR and choose OLED because the PA32UCDM is a QD-OLED. We'll come down to the bottom right and press Next. On this page of the workflow, we're going to want to connect to our hardware. Calman's going to want to connect to the monitor, the meter, and the pattern source in order to perform the calibration. So let's start with our meter. I'm going to press Find Meter. I'm going to keep all meters except those listed below selected and press Search. With Calman now connected to the Portrait Display C6 HDR5000, I'm now going to want to choose my meter profile appropriate for the display that I'm calibrating. You'll notice right now the meter is set to the Bolin X4K27 HDR5, but that's an RGB OLED based on a different panel technology, not the QD-OLED technology. So I'm going to select the dropdown and search for the appropriate meter profile. Let's scroll up, and you'll notice there's actually multiple displays for the ASUS ProArt series. And there we have it, an ASUS ProArt PA32UCDM profile. I'm going to select that so I have the right profile for the right display. For more on meter profiles, feel free to click the link in the description below to watch our meter profiling video. Next, we're going to want to connect to our monitor. Now, monitors may connect in many different ways. The ASUS monitor here connects over a USB-C connection. So I have a USB-C cable running from the back of the monitor to the machine running Calman. Now there's a couple things you should know about the ASUS. We're going to want to make sure it's on the latest firmware. Currently, I have version MCM 105 running on the monitor. To check what firmware you're running, come over to the back of the display and press the button on the left. That'll bring up the menu. You can use the joystick to arrow down to Settings, arrow over, up, go to Information, and you can often see what firmware you're running here in the info page. You'll notice MCM 105 actually doesn't show which firmware I'm running. If you don't see which firmware you're running, odds are you're running MCM 105. I was running MCM 104 on this just the other day, and it was clearly in the menu right there. Next, we're going to want to do one more step. I personally like to do an all reset when I start my calibration. The reason I like to do this is I don't really know the state of the monitor. I don't know if an operator's been touching it, playing with it, calibrating it, doing multiple things. So I personally like doing a full reset on the monitor before I even try to connect to Calman so I know the state that it's in when I start. You'll notice that when I do the reset, it's asking me if I want to turn on energy saving, which might limit the lumens of the display, or if I'd like to keep it off. I'm going to select no and keep the energy saving off. With the USB-C cable connected, the monitor reset, and the latest firmware, we're ready to come back to Calman and press Find Monitor. It already populates with the manufacturer's ASUS, and we have a model ProArt monitors. You'll notice that if I click on the model, I have two options. I have the ProArt monitor with a matrix and the ProArt monitor with a 3D LUT. This means that Calman can calibrate the monitor in two ways. One, it can create a 1D lookup table with a matrix correction for the color gamut mapping, or it can create a 1D lookup table and a 3D lookup table to do further gamut mapping. Now the ASUS PA32UCDM is a very linear display, so I'm actually going to choose the 1D LUT with a matrix for the purpose of this video. If you find you need a little more granularity in your adjustment, feel free to do the 3D LUT portion of the workflow. Select ProArt Matrix and press Connect. Okay, the ASUS ProArt monitor is now connected in Calman, as you can see here in the top right where it says ASUS ProArt monitor display. You'll also notice on the right here it says the level setting of the monitor should be set to full or auto to match the full or PC levels that Calman will calibrate with. Let's come over to the monitor to check where we are. I'm going to press the menu button, use the arrow to come down to Image, and you'll notice there's a setting for input range. Here in input range, you'll notice there's auto, full, limited, limited, 16 to 235 and limited 16 to 254 or extended range, and then SDI full. Since we're already in auto, we'll leave it there for the purpose of this demonstration. We'll exit out of the menu and come back over to Calman. Now, let's come down to the next step, which is connecting to our pattern generator. Today, I'm using the G1 pattern source from Portrait Displays. So I'm going to press Find Generator, select the manufacturer is Portrait Displays, select the model as the G1, and you'll notice the Portrait G1 has been auto-discovered on the network, so I'll simply select it and press Connect. With the G1 pattern source now connected, we're going to want to set it up. You'll notice there's some instructions on the bottom right instructing us to set the internal or external pattern source to full range levels, as well as setting the SDR signal to 100% full screen. So I'm going to come up here to where it says Portrait Displays G1 and open the pattern source panel. If we come down here, we've got a window size set to 10. I'm going to change this over to a full screen 100. We'll leave the delay at 2 for now. We've got an RGB 8-bit. I'm going to set the output to 3840 by 2160 at 24 frames per second. And I'm going to change the range from limited SMPTE to full range. We've now set up the pattern source as instructed here by the guidance. Next, we're going to want to set up the C6 HDR5000 colorimeter. It's not going to do us any good to have it sitting on the table. So I'm going to remove the diffuser. I'm going to take the counterweight. I'm going to place this over the screen in alignment with my alignment pattern. What's really great about the ASUS Modern stand is you can tilt it back just a little bit so the colorimeter sits flush on the screen. We're now ready to come back to Calman and press Next. Now we're at the calibration target section of our workflow. Here, we're going to want to set the targets we want to calibrate the display to. For the purpose of this SDR calibration, I'm going to calibrate it to BT709 with a 2.4 EOTF. So our white point is D65, our color space is BT709 sRGB, and our EOTF right now is sRGB. I'm going to change this to power and set the exponent to 2.4. You'll notice there's an auto cal delta E formula below. Here in the delta E formula, you can change it to whichever delta E formula you wish to work with. Our default's delta EITP, and I'm going to leave it there for the purpose of this video. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. Here, we're on our pre-calibration capture page. This is going to be a great time for Calman to take some readings, plot the data, and see where the monitor is. Let's come down to the bottom right and hit the Read Series button. Okay, our pre-calibration capture has completed. Let's take a quick look. You'll notice here on the bottom right with the grayscale, we are going a little green, or a little minus red and blue. We do have a little bit of error here in the EOTF where you see the gamma is coming a little bit low compared to the target yellow line. And then the Y max is about 170 nits, where in a reference environment, I'd want BT709 closer to that 100 nits range. Our colorimetry is not terrible. We are hitting the edges about where we want to hit for BT709, but certainly some room for improvement. So why don't we come back to the workflow, come down to the bottom right and press Next. Now we're going to want to choose our mode selection. I'm currently in user mode 1 using the matrix calibration. We also have the ability to calibrate user mode 2 or user mode 3. This is a great way if you want to calibrate a mode to say BT709, another one to DCI-P3, and maybe another one to BT2020. I'm going to keep it in user mode 1 for now, and I'm going to reset that mode. Calman's going to prepare the monitor for the calibration process by making sure there isn't any corrections that we're measuring against. Okay, with the ASUS monitor now reset, let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. Here, we're at the lumens calibration portion of the workflow. You may remember I was talking about 100 nits or 100 candelas per meter squared a little bit earlier in this video. I'm going to want to target that for a BT709 reference environment. Now, it's a good practice here to set our lumens a little bit higher than we want to achieve at the end of the calibration. The reason for that is we're currently in a native state or a native white point. That means that we're getting the most light out of the display without any correction. As we start to correct the display, we're going to lose a little bit of that luminance. So a good practice here is to target about 15% above where you want your end luminance to be. So if I want my luminance at about 100 nits at the end, I'm going to target 115 nits to start. So let's come down to the workflow and press Read in the bottom right here. Calman will put up a pattern, take a reading, and let me know my luminance here in the center. So we're currently at 179.2. Let's come over to our brightness slider here, and let's bring that down. Now I can go down one at a time by pressing the minus arrow, or I can come over here and I can just type in the center. So I'm going to type over here instead of 197, I'm going to type 150. If I type 150, I wait for the display to update, I'll come back down to the right and press Read. You'll notice we've come down to 137.9 nits, but I'm still not quite there. So I'm going to come back over to my display controls, and I'm going to go large. I'm going to type in 100, wait for the display to update, come back down to the right, and press Read. I've overshot it. I'm now at 96.3. So I'll come back up to about 125 and press read. I'm going to repeat this process. It's very iterative until I get it right to where I want to be at 115. You can also come down here to the bottom right and hit read continuous. If you hit read continuous, Calman will keep reading as you do the adjustment. Okay, I've now landed on 115.3 nits with a setting of 123. Let's come to the bottom right and press next. Now we're at the AutoCal 1D Plus Matrix. This is going to perform the 1D lookup table measurements and the matrix calibration all in one step. Let's come down to the bottom right and press AutoCal. Now I have a couple options here. If you look at the active grayscale points, I currently have it set to 17 points of full levels. But I also have the option to choose 33 or 65. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to do 33. I think it's a good balance of getting good near black performance while not wasting too much time. Let's come over to 33, select it, and I'm going to leave my delta E target at 0.5. Let's press OK. Okay, with the 1D LUT completed, let's now set up the matrix calibration. We're going to leave the stimulus level here at 100, the delta E target at 0.5, and press OK. Okay, with our 1D LUT and our matrix calibration completed, let's press OK, come down to the bottom right, and press Next. Now we're on the Verify Luminance page. You may remember earlier in the workflow we set our luminance about 15% higher than our target so that the calibration would bring the luminance down during the process. Now we're going to want to make sure we set our luminance exactly where we want it. So let's come down to the bottom right and hit Read Continuous. With Calman now reading continuously, you can see the updates here under Y max. We're at 105.8 nits. Let's come down to brightness and bring this down one at a time until we hit 100. Okay, at 115, we're hitting a Y max of about 100.6 nits. Let's come down to the bottom right, press stop on the continuous read, and press next. We're now at the post-calibration capture portion of the workflow. Let's come down to the bottom right and press read series so Calman can show us how the calibration came out. Okay, let's press next. And now we're at calibration complete. We have a couple options here. We can hit save and view our report, which will save the session so we can always bring it up later and generate a report. We can calibrate another mode, or we can do some additional validation. Let's take a look at the additional validation. I'm going to come over here and click additional validation. This is going to bring up a color checker. I'm going to come down to the bottom right and hit read series. Okay, our color checker is completed. Let's come down to the bottom and press next. Now we're on the saturation sweep page. Let's come down to the bottom right and press read series. Okay, our saturation sweeps have completed. Let's press next. Once again, we're on our calibration complete page, but I'm not quite done. I'd like to show you how to calibrate HDR on this display. So let's come over here and press calibration another mode. Okay, we're back on the welcome page, and I'm going to change this over from SDR to HDR. And we're going to leave this on OLED because we're still on the same monitor, and let's press next. And now we're going to want to connect to our monitor. You may have noticed that Calman disconnected from the monitor when you went to calibrate your new mode. The reason Calman disconnects from the monitor is you need to be in the 1D plus 3D LUT mode in order to calibrate HDR. So if you happen to be in the 1D plus matrix mode, which we were for SDR, you're not going to be able to calibrate HDR. So I'm going to come back to Calman. I'm going to press Find Monitor. You'll notice the manufacturer is ASUS and the model's in ProArt Monitors 3D LUT. This is what we want. So let's press Connect. Okay, with the monitor now connected as the ASUS ProArt monitor display with the 3D LUT method, we're now going to take a look at these instructions on the left. You'll notice that you want to have the display warmed up for at least 1 hour before performing the calibration. Well, we've already had it on for at least an hour for the SDR calibration, so we're okay there. Now we want to make sure dynamic dimming is in medium. Well, this is the OLED model, so we don't have dynamic dimming. We can leave this as is. And pattern insertion must be used. So in order to keep the display stable, we're going to want pattern insertion. I'm going to press Set Pattern Insertion Defaults. That's going to set the default pattern insertion we find works best on the ASUS monitor. Next, there's one more thing before we go to the next step. You'll notice in the top right corner, the ASUS ProArt monitor display is set to User Mode 1. That's the mode I calibrated for SDR. So I'm going to click on the ASUS ProArt monitor here in the top right, and I'm going to change my display mode selection to Mode 2. That's going to choose a new mode so that I'm not calibrating over the same mode that I did for SDR, because I'm probably going to want to switch between SDR and HDR for my production workflow. Now with the display mode selection set to Mode 2, we can come down to the bottom and press next. Here, we're on our Hardware Connect page. We're still connected to the C6 HDR5000 with the appropriate meter profile for the PA32UCDM, but we've disconnected from our pattern generator. We're going to want to press Find Generator. It's important to note that on the ASUS monitor, the internal pattern generator is not supported for HDR, so you're going to want to make sure you have an external pattern generator. Once again, we're using the Portrait Displays G1, and Calman has auto-discovered it when I pressed Find Generator. Select it and press Connect. Now that we're connected to our Portrait Displays G1, we'll want to take note of the settings in the bottom right-hand side. You'll notice that we recommend a 2% window when calibrating the ASUS display in HDR. You'll also want to make sure the pattern generator is sending an SDR signal. So let's come up to the top and click on Portrait Displays G1. We're going to change that window size to a 2% window. We're going to set the delay to 1, as the instructions on the page suggest. We'll leave it in RGB 8-bit. I'll change the output to 3840 by 2160 at 24. We'll set the range to full, and HDR is off. With the G1 set up, we can come down to the bottom and press Next. We're now on our calibration target page. We can really set up any target Calman supports in order to calibrate the ASUS. You'll notice for HDR, we've got a target of D65, BT2020, and ST2084. But I'm going to be working in a P3D65 workflow in my own work, so I'm going to change this. I'm going to change my color space to DCI P3. You'll notice the white point now says Custom, but the X and Y targets here on the right are set to 0.3127, 0.3290. That's D65. So we're still at D65, DCI P3 with an ST2084 HDR-PQ curve. I'm going to leave my AutoCal Delta E formula at Delta E ITP, and I'm going to come down and press Next. Now we're on the pre-calibration capture page of the workflow. I'm going to come down to the bottom right and press Read Series. Okay, our pre-calibration capture is completed, but you'll notice here on the right that our EOTF is tracking more like gamma than it is PQ. We're also only hitting about 182 nits, and our CIE color points are quite a ways off from P3D65. What this tells me is that user mode 2 is probably not already calibrated for HDR. That's okay. We're going to walk through the workflow and get it set up the way we want it for our own workflow. Let's come back down to the bottom right and press Next. Okay, we're now on the mode selection portion of the workflow. I'm already in user mode 2, which we talked about earlier as the mode I want to calibrate, so I'm not going to change that. But I am going to want to reset the monitor to get it in the right state for the calibration. So let's press Reset Selected Mode. Okay, with the mode reset, let's continue on the workflow. Confirm the brightness is set to the max. On the PA32UCDM, the max is 400. We're already there. We also want to make sure our high brightness boost is set to max, which it is. Now, there are some other steps on the monitor. We want to make sure that the monitor is in full range for the calibration. We already know it's in auto from before, but let me take another look at the Portrait Displays G1 and make sure we're still in full. We're still in full range here on the Portrait Displays G1. You'll also notice if we go to the gear icon, Calman is also set to full range with the PC 0 to 255. Now, if you want to measure in narrow range or extended range when you finish, you can change the generator and Calman, as well as potentially the auto mode on the monitor to validate however you would like. But for the calibration, we want to stay in full. Let's come down to the bottom and let's press Measure White. You'll notice the instructions say for an LCD, you should be getting greater than 1000 nits. And for an OLED, you should be getting greater than 500 nits. On the PA32UCDM, I'm expecting to be right around 1000 nits. And you'll notice that we're measuring 1025 nits here along the bottom. Let's press Next. Now we're at the 3D LUT AutoCal portion of the workflow. We have a couple options here. We can do a fixed 9, a fixed 13, or a fixed 17 cube. What that means is Calman's going to take 9 by 9 by 9, 13 by 13 by 13, or 17 by 17 by 17. The more points you measure, the more granularity you have in your correction. For the purpose of this demo, let's do a fixed 13 cube. Of course, if you find those results aren't as precise as you'd like, you can upgrade to the 17-point cube, or you could downgrade to the 9 if you're trying to save time. I've personally found on this monitor that a 9 has worked pretty well, but I do notice I get a little bit better results with a 13. I really think it's the sweet spot. So let's press Fix 13 Cube. Now the AutoCal setup window has come up. We're going to want to turn off that Set 3D LUT Grayscale to Unity because our 3D LUT's not only going to do the grayscale and EOTF correction, it's also going to do the gamut mapping. Let's leave calibration type at Fixed Grid 13 points, and I'm going to keep this in full range. Let's press OK. Okay, the Aurora Color Engine has completed its calibration in 2 hours and 21 minutes with a total of 2,197 reads. Let's press OK, and come down to the bottom right and press Next. Okay, we're now on the post-calibration page of the workflow. Let's come down to the bottom right and hit Read Series. Okay, our post-calibration capture is complete. Let's take a look. If we start over here with the EOTF, we can see the EOTF is tracking a little bit high coming out of black here. Then it falls right in line all the way up to that hard clip at 982 nits. So we're hitting just about 1,000 nits as we would expect on this monitor. If we come down to our Delta E2000, we're tracking a max 1.1 error with an average of 0.5. And if we look over here on the RGB balance, we're tracking really nicely all the way up to about that 1,000 nit point, and then we're going just a little red right at that peak. If we look at the CIE chart over here on the left, our calibration measurements are hitting their targets, and our Delta E2000 has a max of 0.8 with an average of 0.5. Let's come down to the bottom and press Next. We're now on that calibration complete stage of the workflow. We can once again save the report, calibrate another mode, or do some additional validation. Let's take a look at the additional validation. Here, we're on our color checker. Let's come down and do a read series and see how that gamut mapping really came out. Okay, our color checker has completed. Let's take a look. If we look at the CIE chart here on the right, you'll notice the measurements are hitting the targets pretty nicely. I don't see anything that's actually not hitting the target, which is great. If we come over here on the left side with the Delta E2000, we've got a max of 1 with an average of 0.4, and everything's tracking really, really nice across the scale. If we look at our optical comparator here on the bottom, everything looks perceptually matching as I go through this. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Next. Now we're on the saturation sweeps page. Let's come down to the bottom right and press Read Series. Okay, the saturation sweeps have completed. Let's take a look. If I look over here, my measurements are right in their target boxes across the board. We're measuring that P3D65 at 25% sweeps, and we're tracking really nicely across the bottom. There you have it. We've now calibrated SDR and HDR on the ASUS PA32UCDM QD-OLED using Calman Studio, the C6 HDR5000, and the G1 pattern source. We hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you on the next one.